Welcome back to the deep dive. Ever feel like the world's trying to put you in a box?
Totally. It's like everywhere you turn, there are limits and rules.
Well, we're diving into a book that promises a way out. How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World by Harry Browne.
It really makes you think differently about freedom, especially when the world feels anything but.
I gotta admit, when I first saw the title, I was like, freedom in this world.
Right.
But Browne's approach is surprisingly practical. It's not about running away. It's about finding freedom within the reality we live in.
That's what makes it so interesting. He gives you a roadmap, not some impossible dream.
Okay, so let's break down this roadmap. Browne starts with this idea that we all have this deep urge for freedom, like it's built into us.
Yeah, it's like this desire to live authentically on your own terms. He says it can't really be suppressed no matter how much pressure society puts on you.
But he says there's a difference between wanting freedom and achieving it.
Totally. A lot of people see freedom as this fantasy, something unattainable. And that's where those self-imposed limits start creeping in.
So it's not enough to just want freedom, you have to believe it's possible.
Exactly. We have to break free from that mental trap that says freedom is out of reach. And that's where Browne's concept of traps comes in. These are like these limiting beliefs that stop us from making choices that truly line up with our desire for freedom.
Okay, traps. Now you've got my attention. What's an example? Like, what kind of trap steals our freedom?
Well, one is the identity trap. It's about overlooking individual differences and trying to force people into our mold.
Ooh, I think we've all done that, haven't we? Tried to make someone be who we think they should be.
All the time.
Oh.
But that creates friction, not freedom. Browne says everyone is driven by different values and experiences.
But trying to change people just backfires.
It does. We create resistance and limit our own ability to make choices that fit the reality of who they are.
So instead of changing people, we should understand and accept them.
Yeah, and accept that we can't control their choices, only our own. And that brings us to the intellectual trap.
The intellectual trap, what's that about?
It's prioritizing intellect over emotions, like making decisions based only on logic and ignoring feelings.
So trying to be like Spock, all logic, no feelings.
Right. But we're complex beings, and our emotions matter. They tell us about our needs, our values.
So ignoring our feelings cuts us off from important information.
It does. It's not about being ruled by emotions, but also not pretending they're not there. It's finding that balance.
So logic and feelings working together.
Yes. And on the flip side, there's the emotional trap, where we let our emotions take over completely.
Oh, I've been there. Making impulsive decisions you regret later.
We all have. Browne says we have to acknowledge our emotions, but manage them so we're not making rash choices.
It's about finding that balance again, right? Feeling our feelings, but making choices that are good for us long term. Okay, identity trap, intellectual trap, emotional trap. I see a pattern here. It's about understanding ourselves better, all our different parts.
You got it. That self-awareness is so important for freedom. Recognizing our strengths and weaknesses, motivations, desires.
This is fascinating. What other traps are there?
One that can be really tough is the morality trap. It's about blindly following external moral codes without questioning if they actually fit your values.
So it's not ditching morality. It's about defining what it means for you.
Exactly. Browne says we should look at those rules we got from society and family and ask ourselves, do they truly resonate with me? Do they actually make me happy?
That's deep. It's giving ourselves permission to question things. But I imagine that can be scary, going against what you've always been taught.
It can be. But Browne says it's essential for a truly free life. And defining your own morals doesn't mean becoming a jerk. It's about being authentic while respecting others.
So finding balance again. Personal freedom, but still being responsible.
Exactly. And that leads us to the unselfishness trap.
Unselfishness trap. How can being unselfish be a trap?
It's the belief that you must always put others' needs before your own, even if it makes you unhappy.
Oh, wow. I can see how that could become a trap. Giving and giving until you're burned out.
That's it. Browne says this kind of self-sacrifice can actually lead to resentment and feeling trapped.
So it's okay to prioritize our own needs sometimes.
It is. True happiness comes from a balance between our needs and the needs of those we care about.
Like they say, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. You have to take care of yourself before you can truly help others.
That's powerful. What other traps are lurking out there?
Browne also talks about the group trap. This is the belief that the only way to change things is by joining a movement or organization.
So he's saying teamwork isn't always the answer.
Well, it's more nuanced than that. He says relying too much on groups can actually make us feel less powerful to change our own lives.
I get it. You can lose that sense of personal responsibility, like Your individual actions don't matter as much.
Exactly. He's not saying don't collaborate, but recognize that real change starts with individuals making choices.
So balance again, right? Individual action and collective action.
Right. And remembering that change really starts from within.
Okay, that makes sense. What's next on the trap list?
One that's really relevant today is the government trap.
Ooh, juicy. Tell me more.
This trap is believing that the government is always the answer to every problem and should take care of us.
So he's anti-government. I'm not sure I agree with that. Sometimes government action is necessary, right?
He's not necessarily anti-government, but he's skeptical that it's always the best solution. He says government action can have unintended consequences and reduce individual freedom.
I see. It's not black and white. He's saying we need to think critically about when government involvement is appropriate.
Yes. And understand that there are downsides too, like unintended consequences. He's urging us to question assumptions and that there's no quick fix for complex societal problems.
He's pushing us to be more engaged and involved rather than just relying on the government to fix everything.
Absolutely. It's about understanding the balance between individual responsibility and the role of government.
This is giving me a lot to think about. So it's about taking ownership of our lives rather than expecting the government to solve everything.
Right on. It's about finding that sweet spot between personal responsibility and collective action.
I love that. All right, what's the next trap? I'm sure there are more.
Sometimes the biggest obstacle isn't external, it's internal. The despair trap.
Despair trap.
It sounds heavy.
It's that feeling of being stuck, believing you're powerless to change anything and your efforts are pointless.
Ugh, I know that feeling. Like, what's the point? Nothing will ever change.
Exactly. Browne argues that this kind of thinking keeps us stuck. He believes there are always choices we can make to improve our situation, even if they're not easy. So shifting our mindset from, I'm stuck, to, what can I do differently?
Yes. Even small actions can make a difference over time.
That's so encouraging. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the world's problems, but he's saying we each have the power to make a difference.
Right. And sometimes those small acts of courage ripple outwards and create a bigger change than you'd imagine.
All right, we've tackled despair. What's next?
This one can be tricky, especially in our divided world. The rights trap.
The rights trap.
I'm intrigued. It's getting so fixated on our own rights that we miss opportunities to collaborate and find solutions that work for everyone.
So it's not that rights are unimportant, but understanding they exist within a web of relationships, sometimes compromise is necessary.
Exactly. It's finding that balance between asserting your own needs and respecting the needs of others.
It's like, your freedom to swing your fist ends where my nose begins. Freedom with responsibility.
Yes. True freedom comes from recognizing we're all connected and our actions impact others.
It makes me think about all the conflicts in the world. Everyone's so focused on their side.
Right. Browne reminds us that real freedom requires us to move beyond those divisions, recognize everyone's worth, and seek solutions that work for everyone.
That's powerful. Okay, what's next?
This one's about a common misconception, the utopia trap.
Utopia trap. Okay, lay it on me.
It's believing that we have to fix the world, or at least our little part of it, before we can truly be free and happy.
The I'll be happy when mentality. When the world is perfect.
Exactly. We put our happiness on hold, waiting for something outside of us to change.
I think we all do that sometimes. If only things were different, then I could relax.
And Browne says that's a recipe for unhappiness because the world's always changing, there's always something to fix.
So focus on creating freedom now. In the world as it is.
Yes. Focus on what you can control, your own choices and actions, rather than trying to change what's outside your influence.
It's about finding joy and fulfillment in the present moment, even with imperfections.
Precisely. Cultivate gratitude for what you have now while also knowing you can create positive change.
Beautiful. Okay, more traps. What else have we got?
This one we probably all struggle with. The previous investment trap.
Previous investment trap.
It's letting our past investments control our present and future choices, like staying in a job you hate because you've been there so long.
Ah, I see. We get so attached to the time and energy we've put into something, we're afraid to let go, even if it's making us miserable.
Exactly. Browne says this keeps us stuck in situations that drain us and stop us from pursuing better paths.
So we need to be willing to walk away, even if it feels like a waste.
Yes. He says evaluate your situation based on its current value, not on trying to justify past decisions.
So it's about courage, right? Letting go and trusting we can create something better, even if it means starting over.
Exactly. Change is natural, and sometimes walking away from what's not working is the bravest thing you can do, even if it means disappointing others.
Okay, hit me with another trap.
This one is about that feeling of being stuck with no options. The box trap.
Box trap. Sounds claustrophobic.
It's feeling confined by a tough situation and thinking the cost of escape is too high. We feel trapped and resign ourselves to living in that box, even if it makes us unhappy.
But sometimes those limitations are real, aren't they? There are things we can't just wish away.
True. But Brown says those limitations are often more about our fears and lack of imagination than reality. He says question those assumptions, explore new possibilities. The cost of staying trapped is often higher than the cost of escaping.
So we need to challenge those beliefs and realize we might have more options than we think.
Exactly. Face your fears. Think about the costs and benefits of staying versus leaving. He says the cost of staying trapped is often much higher than the cost of breaking free.
So step outside our comfort zone, take risks, and trust we can handle the challenges.
Yes. True freedom comes from challenging the status quo and creating your own path, even if it means facing disapproval or failure.
Okay, this has given me a lot to think about. These traps all seem connected, like a web of limiting beliefs.
Absolutely. They keep us stuck in fear and resignation. But the good news is, once you see them, you can start to break free.
Love that. All right, what else did Brown uncover?
This next one is about our human desire for certainty. The certainty trap.
Certainty trap.
Yeah, we all want guarantees. We want to know our choices will lead to the outcomes we want.
Of course. But Brown argues that that's often an illusion. In a world that's always changing, it's unrealistic to think we can control everything.
So it's about accepting that life is uncertain. We can't predict what will happen, but we can make the best choices with the information we have.
Exactly. True freedom comes from embracing the unknown, taking risks, and trusting you can adapt as things change.
So letting go of control and becoming more flexible.
You got it. Life is a journey, not a destination, and the best experiences often come from those unexpected twists and turns.
I like that. What other traps are there?
This one's especially strong in cultures that value fitting in. The society trap. Society trap. Sounds a bit scary.
It's about conforming to societal expectations, trying to fit in even if it means sacrificing your own happiness.
I think we've all felt that. Pressure to be a certain way, even if it doesn't feel right.
Totally. And Brown says this kind of conformity can be really damaging. True freedom comes from embracing your uniqueness, having the courage to be yourself.
So, defying those pressures and living authentically.
Yes. He encourages us to question those norms, examine our own values, and make choices that feel right for us.
It's realizing our individuality is a strength, not a weakness.
Absolutely. Brown says the world needs more people who are willing to be themselves.
Okay, we've explored a lot of these traps. It's eye-opening to see how they've been operating in my own life.
That's the first step, becoming aware. Once you see them, you can start dismantling them.
But how? Does Brown give us any solutions?
He does. He has lots of practical advice for breaking free.
Okay, good. Tell me more about these solutions. How do we actually start creating that freedom?
One key concept is what he calls direct alternatives.
Direct alternatives. Remind me what that means.
Remember we talked about how many traps come from trying to change others or waiting for things to be different? Direct alternatives are about focusing on what we can control, what actions we can take to improve our situation.
So taking ownership of our lives, not waiting for someone else to fix things.
Exactly. Brown gives lots of examples of direct alternatives for different areas of life. Finances, relationships, how we interact with the government.
Okay, I'm really intrigued now. I want to hear more about these practical solutions.
Me too.
I think we've covered so much already that it's time for a quick break. We'll be back in a moment to dive into those practical tips for creating a life that feels truly free, even in a world that often tries to box us in.
All right, so let's dive into some of those direct alternatives, and how we can actually use them in our lives. Brown gives a lot of practical advice. It's helpful to see how this philosophy works in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm ready to get past the theory and see how we can create more freedom in our daily lives. Where do we even begin?
Well, a lot of people want more freedom in their finances. Brown talks a lot about financial freedom, and it all comes down to taking ownership of your money.
So it's not about winning the lottery or getting a government check.
No, it's not.
It's about understanding money and making smart choices for your financial goals.
Right. And it's not about being cheap or depriving yourself. It's about knowing what's important to you and aligning your spending with those values. He talks about really understanding how markets work, how to invest wisely, and being able to adapt, especially with the economy being so unpredictable these days.
Makes sense. You can't just ignore your finances and hope for the best. You have to be proactive. So what about relationships? Does Brown have advice for finding more freedom in how we connect with others?
He does, and this is where some of his ideas might ruffle some feathers, especially when it comes to romance.
Okay, now I'm really curious.
He's all about honesty, open communication, and what he calls individual sovereignty in relationships. He says relationships should be built on respect and wanting to grow together, not trying to control or change the other person.
That sounds good, but how does that actually work?
Well, he's big on setting boundaries, making your needs clear, and respecting the other person's boundaries, too. He even says to be willing to walk away from relationships that aren't serving you, even if it's hard.
That's tough, especially in a culture that says you have to stay together no matter what.
Hmm.
But I can see how staying in a bad relationship could really drain you and keep both people from being happy.
Exactly. Brown actually talks about this idea of non-marriage.
Non-marriage, what's that?
It's like a relationship structure that focuses on individual freedom and independence. You're committed, but you don't merge your finances or decision-making power.
So like partners in life, but with a certain level of independence.
Yeah. You respect each other's individuality, knowing that a relationship shouldn't mean sacrificing your own identity or financial independence.
That's a different way of thinking about relationships for sure. It really goes against a lot of traditional ideas. Okay, so Brown's got some unique ideas about love. What about all those other societal expectations, the pressure to fit in and meet all the milestones? How does he think we should deal with all that?
He says we should define our own moral code, challenge those norms that don't feel right to us, and put our own happiness first, even before the expectations of others.
So like, no more good girl or good boy mentality. We have to figure out what really matters to us, what aligns with our values, and make choices that support our well-being.
Absolutely. He even gives advice for having tough conversations and setting boundaries, which can be really helpful when dealing with family or societal pressures. It's learning how to say no, even when it's uncomfortable.
It's about giving yourself permission to choose your own path. Okay, so we've got finances, relationships, societal expectations. What about work? Any advice for escaping that soul-crushing 9 to 5?
He has a whole section on breaking free from the treadmill.
The treadmill. I love that. It perfectly describes that feeling of being stuck, just working to pay bills, no real passion or purpose.
That's exactly it. Brown encourages us to get off the treadmill and create a work life that's more aligned with what we want and value. He's all about working smarter, not harder, and focusing on results rather than just hours.
So being productive, but also finding flexibility and maybe even a career that feels like a calling.
Yeah. He talks about exploring alternative career paths, focusing on personal fulfillment over traditional success, and being open to creating your own opportunities.
So it's not about quitting your job tomorrow and becoming a nomad. It's about finding a way to align your work with what's important to you.
That's it. He believes work shouldn't feel like a soul-sucking obligation, and that you can find work that's both challenging and fulfilling.
So if you're miserable in your job, his advice is to look for alternatives, get creative, and find work that's more meaningful.
Exactly. He reminds us we have more options than we realize.
I love that. It's so inspiring. It's like he's giving us permission to dream bigger and create a life that feels right for us.
He is. And he reminds us that this journey to freedom isn't about reaching some perfect endpoint. It's about making choices, learning, growing, and changing along the way.
It's about enjoying the ride, not just focusing on the destination.
Yes. And remember, creating a free life isn't selfish. When you're living authentically and feeling fulfilled, you naturally become more compassionate and able to give back to the world.
So true. When you're happy, you can spread that happiness to others. Okay, so we've talked about finances, relationships, work-life balance. It feels like Brown's ideas touch on everything.
They do, and that's what makes his approach so powerful. He gives you a framework for creating freedom that works for your inner world and your outer world.
So true freedom starts with knowing yourself.
Exactly. He emphasizes self-awareness, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, what motivates you, what you desire.
So before we change our outer world, we need to do some inner work.
Exactly. He even suggests journaling and daydreaming to help you get to know yourself better. He believes that only by truly knowing yourself can you make choices that will lead to real happiness.
Self-knowledge is power. I love that. Okay, we've talked about self-awareness, practical solutions, choosing direct alternative.
Yeah.
Anything else he emphasizes for finding freedom?
One more thing he really stresses is the importance of honesty.
Honesty. How do you mean?
He's talking about honesty in everything, towards others, but especially towards ourselves.
So, like being your true self, even if it means admitting your weaknesses.
Exactly. He says true freedom comes from living according to your values, being who you really are, not who you think you should be.
It's about accepting yourself, flaws and all.
Yes. He believes that when we're honest with ourselves and others, it creates trust and lets us connect more deeply and live more freely.
That's so powerful. Okay, so we've covered a lot today. Brown's ideas about those traps, his direct alternatives, self-knowledge, honesty. But I'm curious, how did he actually live out these ideas? How did his free life actually look?
It's a great question. And Browne actually shares a lot about his personal journey in the book. He's very open about his successes and his struggles.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. So how did he go from feeling trapped to creating a life that felt truly free?
He talks about his early career, how he worked regular jobs, but quickly realized the corporate world wasn't for him. It just felt stifling and unfulfilling.
Like he was stuck in one of those boxes we talked about.
Exactly. He felt trapped by expectations and rules. So he started exploring other paths. He became a writer, an entrepreneur, even ran for president as a libertarian.
Wow, he didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk.
He did. And he says it wasn't always easy. There were setbacks and failures. But he always came back to those core principles: responsibility, self-awareness, and choosing those direct alternatives.
Like using those principles as a guide, even when things were tough.
Yeah. He kept questioning, challenging the status quo, experimenting with new ways of living and working.
So what did his free life actually look like? Was he living on a deserted island off the grid?
Not quite. He describes living in a beautiful home with an ocean view, writing, traveling, pursuing his passions. It actually sounds pretty amazing.
Wow, so he found financial freedom and a lifestyle that he loved. What about relationships? Did that non-marriage thing work out for him?
It did. He talks about finding a partner who shared his values and respected his need for independence. They created a relationship that worked for them, even if it was unconventional.
So you can have freedom and a deep connection, even if it looks different from traditional relationships.
Exactly. He shows that there's no right way to do relationships. The important thing is to find what works for you.
I love that. So he found financial freedom, fulfilling work, a great relationship. It sounds like he really did find freedom. But what about when things went wrong? Did he have a secret to staying positive through challenges?
He's honest that he faced challenges just like everyone else, but he focused on his values and what he could control. He talks about having a clear purpose, knowing what you want out of life, and using that as your guide.
Like having a North Star to keep you on track.
Exactly. And he also emphasizes self-care, taking care of your physical and mental health. When you're grounded and centered, you can handle anything that comes your way.
So it's not about ignoring problems, but about being equipped to handle them.
Exactly. It's about building resilience, inside and out.
You know, it's interesting how Browne wrote this book decades ago, but his ideas are so relevant today, even more so now with all the chaos in the world.
I agree. His emphasis on individual responsibility and choice feels so important now. We're constantly being told what to think and how to live. He reminds us that we have the power to choose differently.
It's like a call to action to create the life we want, even if it goes against the grain.
Absolutely. And I think that's why his book is still so popular today. It gives people hope, reminds them that they're not powerless. They can shape their own destinies.
Okay, we've covered a lot. His philosophy, practical advice, even his personal story. But for the person listening to this right now, what's the one thing they should take away from this? What might inspire them to make a change for more freedom in their life?
I think the most important message is that freedom isn't given to you, you create it. It's the choices you make every day, big or small. The world might try to limit your choices, but ultimately you decide how you respond, how you act, and how you create your own reality.
So it's not about waiting for the world to change, it's about changing yourself.
Yes. It's about taking control of your life, knowing what you want, and making choices that align with your values.
It's about empowering ourselves to create the life we want.
Exactly. And realizing that freedom isn't some far-off dream. It's a journey that starts right now with the choices we make.
Freedom is a journey, not a destination. I love that. Okay, that's great for our listeners.
Yeah.
But I would like to hear your personal take on things. What really stood out for you as we explored Browne's work?
You know, I think one thing that really hit home for me was that unselfishness trap. It's so easy to think that you have to give and give and give to others, especially, as women. We're kind of raised that way.
Right, like our worth is tied to how much we do for others.
Exactly. But Brown reminds us that it's okay to prioritize our own needs and desires.
Yeah, it's about balance, taking care of yourself so you can take care of others. And I thought that whole non-marriage concept was fascinating. Really makes you
Yeah.
rethink traditional relationships.
It does. It's like, who says a relationship has to look a certain way? The important thing is that it works for both people. And that emphasis on self-knowledge, that really got to me.
Me too.
It's like so many of us are just going through the motions, doing what we think we should do instead of what we really want to do.
Yeah,
Brown's saying, wake up, pay attention to what's going on inside, and start making choices that feel right for you.
love that. Self-knowledge is the key.
It is. And even if we don't agree with everything Brown says, his book really pushes you to question things, to think differently about what it means to be free.
Yeah, it's like a challenge to create the life you want on your own terms.
Exactly.
Well, I think this has been an amazing conversation. Harry Browne's How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World really gives you a lot to think about.
It does.
And for everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has inspired you to think about what freedom means to you and maybe take some steps to create more of it in your own life.
Absolutely.
So until next time, keep diving deep and keep choosing freedom.
Thanks for listening.